Well, hey everyone, this is our Hawaiian Volcano summary for August 14th, 2025. In a week since Kīlauea's 30th episode of its ongoing summit eruption, the volcano has been recharging with magma and building pressure underground once again. We can detect this through monitoring instruments that show gas pistoning cycles out of sight underground in the vent area, whereas on the surface, all we are seeing in the last week is a settling of the ground surface following the release of gas from the recent lava flows. This is a B1 camera looking at the eastern side of the crater. And what you can see here is this sagging, downdropping of the surface of the crater floor where lava had covered it last week. Episode 30 covered about 80% of the inner crater floor here. And with very gas-rich flows, since the fountains were not very high, gas got mixed into the lava and distributed across the crater floor. And over the last week, we've seen the sagging motion across much of those lava flows. So the B1 camera here on the eastern side is picking this up quite clearly on the eastern margin. And if we come across the crater, we see this is evident across the whole southern boundary. To see the near vent areas, we switch to the K1 camera. Sorry, the KW camera. Here it is, with the vents shown on the east. And if I zoom into this, you can see here in the center some of these areas that pooled larger areas of lava are more visibly sagging as well. So that's all we can see on the surface. If we look at the thermal cameras for the last week, sped up since the end of episode 30, we see very few changes as far as heat distribution on a crater floor. We do see there's still heat coming from the vent that is not always visible through the volcanic emissions there. Visibly, we have seen the diminishing of glow following episode 30 and lava on the flow field. Mostly it's been dark for the whole week from the whole entire vent area, as you see this black screen here. The USGS does report that glow became visible from the south vent in the last couple nights, but very weakly and intermittently. So it's coming, but it's blocked perhaps shallowly in the north vent and other areas, and nothing really visible long term. Here is the ground tilt at the summit in blue, showing the resumption of inflation following episode 30. You can see we've not quite reached the same levels as we had prior to the onset of the most recent episode. But as you can see, those inflation rates start off more quickly and then sometimes will flatten out or even will go downwards, meaning that the onset of the next episode is more difficult to predict. So here you see that current pattern. You can see episode 30 also had that extra inflationary pulse just prior to the onset, which corresponded to the emplacement of the new dike, the new fissure that opened up on the west side of the crater, southwest side of the crater. And so any complications like that could also delay the onset. Here is the last 3 months. So you can see the greater pattern of how we've sawtooth this recovery. And then whenever an eruption episode occurs, we relieve pressure and drop back down our ground tilt before resuming over and over again. So we're still within that pattern. The USGS update from today notes that fountains are likely to start between August 16th and 20th, with only a little bit of glow overnight. Now there is a little bit of extra information here in the analysis that because there have, let's see here, because of the increase in elevation of the vent, magma is building more pressure beneath the vent areas and can be injected into weak areas. And that is likely what occurred during the fissure emplacement last week. So they say this is possible. This could result in permanent changes in event locations and of behavior. But currently, there are no indications that anything would occur outside of the summit region. The rift zone continues to contract, indicating no magma in that part of the system. So that is the prognosis for the next episode. We're building up, expecting perhaps a little bit more variability. The impacts still remain the volcanic gases and small bits of tephra that can blow with the wind. Here is the Purple Air Citizen Science Monitoring Network, showing low levels of gas across the island in between our episodes. Occasionally you see slightly higher values in the near vent areas. Even with our pause between episodes, we are putting out a decent amount of gas from the volcanic summit. And sometimes this wraps around to the Kona coast, and so you sometimes see these elevated values on the Kona side as well, as you see right here. But the main hazard is the big pulse of gas that comes out with the onset of each new episode. And when that happens, all of our island residents, especially in this southwest area and wrapping the Kona, should be prepared for the same patterns we've seen 30 times already within the last 8 months. The USGS has updated their table of eruption information, revising downwards the maximum fountain heights to about 50 meters or 200 feet or so, with a volume of 8 million cubic meters erupted during that episode, the third largest output thus far. And that's despite having very short fountains. Here is our under 200-foot fountains for episode 30. And you can see that, like 29, they were shorter than what we'd seen in the previous interval of 6 or 7 episodes. The volumes, though, if I put the volume up here for episode 30, you'll see that this is actually the third highest value, only excluding the first couple of events early on in the sequence. And so even though our fountains are not very high, we've put out a increasingly large amount of lava over the last few episodes here. And if we look at the discharge rates, which is how much lava is coming out over the length of that time, right? So the eruptions have different lengths, and so you can see how much is coming out per second or per minute. You can see that episode 30 plots quite highly here, a very high discharge rate, similar to many of the most recent episodes, and also similar to the very first fissure that opened this eruption back in December 23rd, 2024. So putting it all together here, if we look at the height of the fountains versus the discharge rate, what we can see is that episode 30 was most like episode 1, our very initial onset, which reinforces this idea that the summit is building extra pressure before it can burst out in a similar way as the eruption onset at the beginning. So those are our summary of the discharge rates and heights for this most recent episode 30. Moving forward, once again, here is our earthquakes for Kīlauea for the last week. We see a flurry of events here in the south flank, just south of the summit, as well as continuing small level events around the summit itself. So in this zoomed in view, this also corroborates this building pressure to summit that likely is increasing pressure on a flank and as well against Maunaloa to the northwest. Deep earthquakes from Pahala continue. This is all associated with the hotspot feeder source of the volcano. We can presume magma is still coming in at a healthy rate into the volcano to cause all these changes at the surface. But overall, big picture, our earthquake rates per week are still quite low, as they have been ever since the onset of eruption in December. Once the pathways are opened, you'd normally have less pressure building, and so this is why this change is so interesting here recently, that the pressure is building once again. And perhaps we'll see earthquake rates rise in the next weeks or months here. Looking at the ground position itself, this is the length of the summit caldera north and south. And you can see here is that we are stretching apart in our inter-episode periods. And when we have an eruptive episode, we seem to contract our accordion back. And this is a range of about 9 or 10 centimeters or a few inches here that we're moving every week or two, stretching apart. As we mentioned earlier, that's contained to the summit area. This is a similar plot for the East Rift Zone by Pu'o'o. And what you see is a decrease in the values indicating contraction of the rift zone and thus no new magma coming into it. So all is well down on the lower East Rift. We're watching for changes at the summit. Seems to be almost a reset of the summit eruption where we're building pressure once again and could potentially reestablish vents or establish new vents in areas that we haven't seen thus far. And that's our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week.